Welcome to Women in Retail Talks, a podcast from Women in Retail Leadership Circle. Our mission is to foster leadership development for our membership community of women executives at leading retailers and brands. We've updated our podcast format to better serve the wants and needs of our community. Our refreshed podcast will feature in-depth interviews with female C-suite executives from enterprise retail organizations who've defined their own career success and made their way to the metaphorical corner office. The episodes will include stories of professional growth, leadership development, personal journeys, and more. Every other Wednesday, you'll get real advice and valuable lessons from these powerhouse women. We hope you enjoy our show, and we welcome your feedback.
Hello, and welcome to Women in Retail Talks, the podcast where C-suite executive women in the retail space share their stories of professional growth, leadership development, personal journeys, and more. I'm Marie Alvejez at Women in Retail Leadership Circle, a membership-based community of executive women at leading retailers and brands. Today, I'm joined by Kristin Patrick, the Chief Marketing Officer and Executive Vice President of Claire's, the teen global fashion brand powerhouse known for its ear piercings and accessories. In this episode, we're discussing Kristin's career path, how she developed her brand, and how she plans for the future. Kristin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so great to meet you. So you've had a fascinating career in the worlds of entertainment, beauty, traditional brands. You've kind of run the gamut. So I was wondering if you could just start by giving us some highlights of your career.
Yeah. So I'm super grateful for absolutely every opportunity that I've been given in my career. And I think what's interesting about my career is that even though I've worked across really diverse industries, there's something in common with all of the companies and brands that I've worked with. And that is that culture is at the center of every single company that I've worked at. There's always a really strong consumer focus. And what I've been able to do, even starting off very early in my career, is pick up learnings along the way. And even, 10 years later, I've been able to sort of incorporate some of the learning. So just as an example, I started off my career at the Walt Disney Company. And, I really like to say that I got my entire, I would say, philosophy around brand building at that company. What they're amazing at is teaching young executives to create a brand that is so super focused on what it stands for, and then evolving that into other foundations and businesses. So they market across content, product, and experiences. And that philosophy has really stayed with me throughout my entire career. When I first started talking about content while at, 10 years later, 15 years later, while I was at Gap Inc., talking about content and, partnerships and bringing some of that thinking to a retailer was quite novel at the time. And now, I think everybody understands that storytelling is at the heart of everything that we have to do, particularly for Gen Z and Gen Alpha. It's all about content. And so some of those philosophies were embedded for me very early on in my career.
Yeah, that's great. And I watched a video of you at NRF, I think it was, or Shop Talk a few years ago, in which you talk about that brand storytelling and how important it is. So it's great that you kind of learned that early on. So for our listeners, can you just briefly say, I know you said you started at Walt Disney and then you were at Gap. And so I was wondering if you could just kind of give us a brief overview of what you were doing at each of those companies.
Yeah, sure. So I spent time in the retail industry. I worked for Calvin Klein. I worked for Gap Inc. I was the chief marketing officer for Liz Claiborne's Lucky brand. I spent time in the entertainment industry. I worked for Disney. I worked for NBC Universal. I was the chief marketing officer for Playboy. And then I spent time in the beauty industry. I was with Revlon. Most recently, I was the chief marketing officer for PepsiCo.
And so you just became Claire's chief marketing officer, in December, is that right?
Yeah, I resigned from PepsiCo And after a lot of thinking, I made a personal decision to step back from my role. My daughter had 2 years of high school left, and I really wanted to be based in Los Angeles for a little while, make sure she got through school okay. And I took those 2 years, I did a bit of consulting. And when it was time for me she got off to college, she's good. When it was time for me to kind of think about what I wanted my next move to be, I thought long and hard about things that really, kind of touched my soul and things that I was interested in. And I wanted to do something that was, focused on youth, something focused on youth culture, something focused on, kind of bettering the lives of young consumers and really making an impact there. So when the Claire's opportunity came along, I truly couldn't pass it up. One of the things about Claire's is that it's a 50-year-old brand, believe it or not. And when I talk to consumers about it, the first thing they say is, they have some nostalgic memory about it. They'll talk about, ear piercing. A lot of them enter the brand during this amazing rite of passage. Or, I was sitting on a panel the other day, and one of the moms messaged me and said that her son was actually transitioning, and that they went into a Claire's and they had the amazing experience and opportunity of buying some earrings together. And so, that kind of stuff, when a brand has that kind of impact, it really touches my heart.
Yeah, that's great. And I know that, or I'm assuming that part of the reason that you were drawn to Claire's was because you must have seen it as an exciting challenge. I mean, given everything that company and that brand has been through over the last few years, and then most recently with the filing of the IPO, it sounds like you're kind of drawn to the type of work where you're asked to be a change agent, at least from what I've read about your various roles. So did that draw you to that type of work? I mean, what did you see as the challenge for Claire's?
So Claire's is, to me, so much more than a retail company, right? And in fact, for me, it's this amazing global iconic brand. And we talk about it in those terms. So I am definitely drawn to challenges and brand reboots. And it seems like every time I go to a company, I'm looking forward into the future. I'm, seeing things that oftentimes are 6 months to a year ahead of the rest of the world. And so when we talk about Claire's, for me, it is, how do you establish and embed very, very deeply what this brand stands for? At the heart, Claire's has always been about self-expression and creativity, and really allowing consumers to find their true, be whoever it is that they are. And one of the things that really resonates with consumers when we started doing some of the brand work was that idea. So if we're a brand that stands for, self-expression and creativity, just imagine where you can go with that. So you've got the retail stores. We're expanding the footprint into other distribution channels, including retail. When we talk to consumers, they talk about, wanting cafes from us. They talk about wanting content. They talk about the very exciting place that a brand like Claire's can go. And so, what for me coming into the company, it's how do we take what this brand has always stood for and embed it in multiple parts of consumers' lives? And that's my thinking. So how does the brand exist across content? How will it exist and continue to exist across product? And then what are the experiences that we want to give consumers?
Yeah, there's just so much opportunity there. I can't wait to see, where you take it.
It's one of those opportunities where I'm so energized by the company. I forget the time, I forget like that it was a long day and I need to stop working. And it feels really nice to have that.
Yeah, super productive. I love it. So I want to go back to what you were saying about being able to look 6 months to a year out. I've read that you kind of have a knack for doing that and seeing, vision even further into the future. And I'm wondering, first, if you do that with your personal brand as well, and second, how you develop that skill, because I feel like so much of our day-to-day is just spent, putting out fires left and right. So how do you kind of train yourself to think long term?
Culture and culture hunting, I think, it's an art form. And when I look at people who are sort of inventing the future, there's a commonality around curiosity, like a natural inherent curiosity. I think that some of the visionaries or people who see things in the future also have a knack for, I would say, bucking tradition. They don't just settle, like, why do things have to be this way? And in some ways, it's not necessarily a learned skill set, right? You either have that or you don't. So I think some of the best people that I've worked with are natural consumers of everything from art and design to entertainment, to really understanding what motivates people, and watching their lives and how they're using products, how they're consuming information. I'm a absolutely like crazy reader of everything from the New York Times to High Snobiety, and very, very watchful of people and what they're doing. And so I've always been that way, even since I was really, really young. It's kind of a thing that's inherent in me. And over the years, I've crafted this philosophy about when it's a good time to pluck a trend. You want to get it before the concept takes off. After it's taken off, if you're not a fast mover, you can end up feeling like a me too, which is problematic. And oftentimes, if you're one of those people who see trends happening and you recommend jumping on top of it, it's very difficult to move through traditional organizations, because not everybody is seeing the evolution in consumer habits, or they're not really seeing the potential in a celebrity, or they're not really seeing something changing. And so you have to be able to hone your skill set in terms of selling in a vision, convincing people. And that's not always easy.
Yeah, it's like you always have to have your eyes open to like every possibility and seeing which direction it can go in, or multiple directions.
Absolutely. And then, selling it into the organization, I think can often be really difficult.
Right, exactly. Okay, so speaking of, you said culture is very important to you when you're looking at a company. So as you're seeing white space in an industry, how do you know when your talents are potentially needed elsewhere?
Yeah, interesting, because in some ways, knowing when to leave a company or industry is a true art form in and of itself. I always make decisions based on a combination of gut instinct, where the consumer habits and trends are leading, and all the other things I think we normally look at with companies, the culture, the opportunity. I think being very clear with yourself on what's important to you and what excites you is incredibly important as well. I know that I love evolution and that I love new thinking, right? So a lot of the opportunities that I get involved with are either brands that need a dusting off and a reinvention, or they have to do with industries, like I say, that are carefully and closely linked to culture. So those are the opportunities that excite me. And I think as people are managing their careers, the combination of, first of all, does it excite you? how do you feel about it when you're like by yourself and you're thinking about, gosh, how do I feel about walking into, that business every day? You've got to feel great about that. I think you need to look at your personal financial situation. Is it going to move you and your family ahead? I never worry about title. I worry more about what the remit of the job is, and can I create real impact? And like I say, that served me well. A lot of people are really, really calculated about job moves and, not wanting to take steps back. I don't know. I think that your career and your life are kind of a sojourn. It's like you pick up things along the way. And sometimes it's okay to take a step back, to take like 6 steps forward.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to ask you specifically about a few roles at PepsiCo. I read that you were the first ever global chief marketing officer for the Pepsi brand, and then after a few years, you had another role created specifically for you in brand development. So, how does someone get or make those opportunities for themselves? Like, how do you position yourself to have that success in which a role is created just for you?
First of all, I've been so lucky to have amazing people who believed in me and mentors, right? Like, very, very early on at the Walt Disney Company, I had a woman who really helped me. I had mentors at Revlon. Art Peck at Gap was a solid supporter of mine. Cheryl Vitale at Revlon, I think she's the president of Kiehl's now. Brad Jakeman and Indra Nui at Pepsi. It's like they took the time to understand what I was good at. And, for all of those people, I so appreciate them, because I had, this knack for envisioning the future, for seeing things a little bit differently. At Revlon, I wasn't a traditional packaged goods marketer. And Cheryl took the time to understand that. Even at Gap, Art Peck really backed me up in some of the things that we did there. So first of all, I'm so grateful for those people, because I think without them, like, I could have gotten lost in the dust, right? Because I tend to zig when everybody else is zagging. And like I say, I feel like, both Indra and Brad took the time to really get to understand what it was that I was good at. And I think that knowing in yourself, like, what it is you're good at, and carving a unique position and space for yourself, while that can be really, really difficult, it's been the most fulfilling thing. I have to tell you that, I'm this weird mix of deeply analytical, operational thinking, but highly, highly visionary and creative. Okay. And oftentimes I would sit in companies and try to squash or quell the part of me that was thinking about the future or noticing a consumer trend because it didn't fit with the conversation or it scared people too much. And oftentimes I would sit in these meetings and feel really out of place. Over the years, it's how do you hone that skill? And then how do you take that skill? And even in the most conservative of companies, even when business is bad, like, how can you take some of that thinking and sprinkle it into the day-to-day? Like I say, there were times when I felt ashamed, particularly, I think the relationship with the chief financial officer and the COO and the chief marketing officer is always a tension-filled one. But I think it's loving, what it is you're really good at, and then finding ways to make it that uniqueness benefit.
Right. And not constraining yourself into a box or into a title, like you said.
I think that's right. Yeah. I was reading that the whole philosophy about like really deep training in one area is in some ways going to be a thing of the past. And I think particularly in marketing, like somewhat being a jack of all trades is actually really important. The keen understand, marketing, I always say is one part art and then the other part is science. And so I think that the combination of financial acumen, operational excellence, and understanding how to, execute the most amazing projects, but also that magic, having the ability to see into the future, to think about where your consumer base is going. That skill set, I think, is incredibly important.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of, you mentioned a few mentors of yours and people that have helped kind of shape your career. And so I know that mentorship is really important to you, especially now in your career mentoring other young women. So what advice would you give for those who are looking at your career with admiration and working towards being in a executive position like yours one day?
I had to pause to think about that. Truly, I think that the ability to trust your gut, like that is not an easy thing to do. And in fact, it's funny because I always have a sticky note on my computer that says, trust your gut. Like I have to remember that. And even when I, manage my teams, I really want to know what they think, right? And oftentimes you get in situations where you hear that voice inside and you ignore it. I really think that deep internal work is absolutely incredible for people. When I'm called to ask about changing careers, changing companies, is this a good move for me? I always start with like the introspective part of what these people want to do, like what makes them happy, what keeps them motivated. And I think that that's always the place to start versus thinking about, monetary value, titles, because I think the worst thing you can do for yourself and your psyche and your life soul is to, work at a company where you hate the products, you're not enthused about wearing them or using them, or you're waking up every day just for that paycheck. Like that is such a soul depleter. So when I mentor, I do try to be as human as possible. And then I definitely think that in certain businesses and categories, like it depends on what your end goal is. And I think that it is being a little more planful than I was. I would hope that some of the people I mentor, I can help them be a little more planful. But that's how I think about it.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, don't start with the analytical pros and cons list necessarily. I always like to say, whatever decision you make is going to be the right one until it's not anymore, and then you can make a new decision.
That's right.
Well, Kristin, thank you so much for joining me on Women in Retail Talks. It has been such a pleasure getting to know you.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me. I was honored to be part of this.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please go to womeninretail.com/podcasts for show notes. Women in Retail Talks is available on Apple, Google, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few moments to rate and review our show. Lastly, if you're a female retail leader interested in joining our community at Women in Retail Leadership Circle, visit womeninretail.com/apply. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Women in Retail Talks.